Hey, this is the Jack's Diggin' Dude, and this is the Secret Treasure Hunt New Orleans 40th Anniversary Solve. One thing everybody should know is that I derived the solution on my laptop using readily available materials on the internet. So, a quick shout out to thesecret.pbworks.com, 12treasures.com, all the fair people who uploaded content to YouTube, and of course, Google Maps. Let's take a closer look at the image, and these are the things that sort of stuck out to me. I broke it up into two pieces for better resolution. At the top of the clock, there's this very fancy carving. It looks a little bit unusual to me. There's a nighttime scene with stars and the moon, and if you associate that with where the hands on the clock are pointing, it seems to be a midnight scene. There's an arch here with what appears to be the turquoise gemstone inside. There's some numerals, numbers in the corners, a couple flowers, the word preservation with two arrows pointing to it, a few tick marks on the outside of the clock, what appears to be something in maybe a second hand, and of course the boy who seems to be dressed as a jockey. The bottom part of the image is dominated by a mask with a face, a hand, and a fancy sleeve. There's also a horse's head. There is this checkerboard backdrop. And one other thing I noticed was this little cutout on either side of the clock here is a little bit different. There are many clues in image 7 and verse 2 that direct us to the city of New Orleans. Let's take a look at those. So let's look at the first line in the verse. At a place where jewels abound. I think it's widely accepted by the secret community that this is a reference to all the bead tossing and faux jewelry that go into the extravagance of the Mardi Gras festival. Returning back to the verse, here is a sovereign people who build palaces to shelter their heads for a night. Well, that is a direct excerpt from the book Travels in the United States in 1847 by author Michael Aaron Sarmiento. Actually, in 1847, New Orleans was the third largest city in the United States, and the book describes the author's stay at the St. Charles Hotel, which at the time was one of the finest in all of the U.S. Okay, looking at the image for New Orleans city clues, first thing I notice is the numbers in the corners of the clock. This seems to be a recurring theme in images in The Secret, that the numbers that are hidden in the image usually represent the range for the coordinates of the city in question. So for this coordinate, you would see a 29 and a 30, and for this coordinate, you would most likely see a 90 and a 91. Well, here's a 90, here's a jumbled 91, here's a 29, and probably most likely there's a 30 in this corner here. Another great match is the mask is a great match to legendary New Orleans jazz icon Louis Armstrong. The entrance to Louis Armstrong Park is also a good match for this little arch above the clock. There's a couple of these flowers that match up with statues in Storyland. In Lafayette Square, there's a statue, or I think there used to be a statue, of John McDonough. It's a good match for the boy jockey in the image, although it would have to be mirrored to match the statue, as you see on the right image here. And below is a better angle at this statue. A couple differences. The boy's arm seems in a weird position. His legs are a little different. His arm's a little different. But it's a pretty good match. Returning to the verse for more New Orleans city clues. The namesakes meeting near this site. So when I see the word site, that leads me to believe that that means where the cask is buried. Namesakes, well, if we look at the image again, there's the word preservation. In New Orleans is the Preservation Hall, which houses the namesakes, the Preservation Hall jazz band. And this is a very historic part of New Orleans and the jazz culture. The Preservation Hall is right here on the map, and if you go down just like a block, maybe a block and a half, you get to Jackson Square. So that leads me to believe that the cask is buried in Jackson Square. Another clue in the image, if you read the word preservation in the direction this arrow is pointing, you get PRES, which is a common abbreviation for president. Jackson Square was named after Andrew Jackson, who was the 7th president of the U.S. If you read the same word in the other direction, as shown by this arrow, it points to another city clue, NO, New Orleans. So now we've narrowed our focus to Jackson Square. Let's take a look at both the image and the verse for location clues that back up this theory. On the right is an image of Jackson Square. I can't imagine there being a more beautiful vista point in all of New Orleans. So this seems to me a perfect place to begin the search for the cask. What you have in Jackson Square is you have in the center a statue of Andrew Jackson that was a copy of the one that's in Washington, D.C. In the background you have the beautiful and majestic St. Louis Cathedral. There are also 4 little statues in in the corners of Jackson Square, as we will see once we start walking through the park. This photo was probably taken across the street, kind of where these people here are standing, pointing, shown by the arrow. That is known as Washington Artillery Park. And if you're standing where these people are standing, it's exactly 15 steps down to the ground. So if we go to the verse, 15 rows down to the ground, check. These are location clues for Jackson Square. The top of the clock in the image looks a lot like the structure above the small windows on the St. Louis Cathedral. The clock on St. Louis Cathedral is similar to the clock shown in the image, with the exception of the numeral 4 is depicted differently in the image than on the clock. But we'll get back to that later. The horse with the open mouth is a very good match for Andrew Jackson's horse. More Jackson Square location clues in the image. If you look at the spires on top of St. Louis Cathedral, they look a lot like, they're very ornate and look a lot like the hands on the clock. Also, if you enter St. Louis Cathedral, you'll see that the floor has this checkerboard pattern, which is a good match for the backdrop checkerboard pattern in the image. A couple of fun items that I don't put a lot of weight to, but if you look at the boys, the lower legs and the gap in between them, it's similar to what you see on the horse. And if you look at his arm here, it looks more like a leg with a boot, which is similar to that on the Jackson statue. Going back to the verse, as the sound of friends fills the afternoon hours. Well, Jackson Square is a very popular community gathering place, and it's always filled with artists, musicians, tourists, uh, most afternoons. So I would say that that definitely is a good match. Going back to the verse, for the lines, gnomes admire Faye's delight, I wasn't sure what a Faye was, and I didn't know what the exact definition of a gnome is, so I looked them both up on the online dictionary, and this is what I found. Gnome, a legendary dwarfish creature supposed to guard the Earth's treasure underground. Well, that's pretty cool. Or a small garden ornament in the form of a bearded man with a pointed hat. That's usually the definition I associate with gnome. And thirdly, a small, ugly person. Let's not go there. For Fae, it says fairy. So looking up fairy, it says a small imaginary being of human form that has magical powers, especially a female one. So what do the two have in common? Well, it seems that they're both small beings. And gnomes are generally male and fairies are female. Looking at the verse, if you notice the words gnomes and fays are plural, that means there must be more than one of each. Well, the four statues that are in the corners of Jackson Square, they are very small beings. They're all about I estimate 3 to 4 feet tall, and there are 2 female and 2 male statues. So I think this is a good match for that verse. So let's take a closer look at the 4 statues that are in the corners of Jackson Square. They are representative of the 4 seasons. The first one, winter, an old bearded man muffled in a cloak. Second one, spring, a young girl holding flowers. Autumn, a native mature woman, sickle and girdle. And summer, and I believe there's a typo in this one, a young man, legs crossed, book at breast, luxuriant grapes resting on a tree trunk on which he leaned. The key part of that whole passage is the last word, leaned. Also, it should be noted that I believe the misrepresented 4 in the clock is a clue to the 4 season statues. Looking at the verse again, there's the line, only 3 stand watch. Well, when I read that line, the word only sticks out, and when I read only 3, to me that means that there are probably more than 3 in the group of whatever we're talking about. If we're going back to the 4 season statues, remember the last summer statue was described as leaning. The other 3 are standing, so I think this is a good match for only 3 stand watch. If we go back to the time in which Byron Preiss created these puzzles, and you think about what he was doing in creating these puzzles, he was probably walking around carrying a notepad and pencil, definitely a camera, maybe a map and some pamphlets, and who knows, maybe even a compass. but not much more than that. So there has to be a viewpoint, and I like to call this the key viewpoint, or a photograph of a certain area that was used to create the painting. So I think this is the most important part of solving this puzzle, and maybe even other puzzles, is to determine that vantage point, the key viewpoint that was used to create the image or part of the image. Let's talk about the significance of the mask. If you look at the mask in the image, and remember this image is supposed to be a night image, it does have kind of an eerie glow to it and some shadowing. The one thing I really noticed was that if you were holding a mask or any object on a stick, your arm would not be at this angle, and it would not be in the same angle or parallel to the same direction as the stick. It would most likely be coming out to the side. And you can play around with this at home. The only way that the arm would be vertical and in the same kind of direction as the stick of the mask is if it was being held as high as you can hold it above your head. Well, I'm 6 feet tall, and if I were to hold a mask like this above my head, it would probably be, you know, I don't know, somewhere 8 to 10 feet up in the air. Well, what's 8 to 10 feet up in the air and has kind of an eerie glow to it? Well, there are street lamps all throughout Jackson Square that are about that height. And they do have the similar sort of triangular shape that the mask has. So I would say that this is definitely a match, that the mask represents a street lamp. So let's take a closer look at the hand. It's obviously very ghoulish looking. It's got some really grody nails. It's got some very pronounced wrinkling. Definitely some odd positions of the fingers. So I was thinking about what this could mean. And I know artists are really good with shadowing and texture. And the one thing that really stuck out to me on this image was the wrinkle pattern down at the bottom of the palm. It didn't look quite natural to me. So I kind of focused my search on that area. So this is definitely someone's hand made out of skin, but what other, materials wrinkle like that? And the obvious answer is cloth or clothing. So let's go back and look at the clothing on the Four Seasons statues. And this is what I found. If you look at the clothing on the spring statue, there is a wrinkle pattern just below her hip that is very, very similar to that shown on the hand. I think it's almost too close to be coincidental. The stick of the mask is also a good match for the arm on the statue. Keep in mind that in the image it depicts a night scene, and I think if this statue was photographed at night under the street lamp condition, street lamp lighting, that definitely the shadows would be different, and actually they might be a better match for the shadowing and things in the image of the hand. Maybe the nails will start to emerge. Maybe this other wrinkle pattern will start to emerge. But for me, this is enough evidence because I think it's beyond coincidental that the hand is supposed to represent the spring statue. And if you don't believe me, stay tuned. One possible match for the fingernails in the hand are the feet on the spring statue. They seem to be in a similar position, but it is difficult to tell from the resolution of this photo. Another clue in the spring statue is the area around her hand holding the cornucopia. It looks very similar to the position of the boy's hand in the image, where the little white section representing the cornucopia. And the one thing about this image that I noticed was that his buttocks is kind of deformed. And I think that shape there is represented by the shadow in the spring statue. Again, the lighting at nighttime and shadowing might be a little different. The other thing is the boy's face is very similar to the spring statue's face, of course in profile. That is something that is also a common theme among the various images and puzzles. Here's something I'm adding just for fun. Again, I don't put a lot of merit on stuff like this, but it's fun. It's fun stuff. So if you look on the sides of the pedestal of the clock, the cutouts are a little bit different. And if you look at the pedestal of the spring statue, the right side of it looks similar to what is shown on the right side of the image. And on the left side, if you take one of the lamps and you flip it over, it's hard to see, but this little feature here is an exact match for this side of the clock pedestal. Coming to the conclusion that the mask represents a street lamp and that the hand represented the spring statue, the key was to put the two together to come up with the key viewpoint. Well, as you can see from these shots taken from Google Maps, there is a street lamp directly behind the spring statue. So it is my belief, and unfortunately using Google Maps, you cannot do a fine sidestep. You know, the jumps in the images are pretty crude. So I was unable to capture what I call the key viewpoint with the street lamp directly behind the spring statue, and I believe lining up with her left arm. So I put together a composite drawing on the left that shows what I believe the lamp behind the spring statue photo would look like, where the lamp lines up with the left arm on the spring statue. Of course, again, this is something I have not verified. I'll leave it to the secret community to maybe capture this image, hopefully with the correct lighting, to post it for everyone to review. And maybe these other features of the hand and the sleeve might appear from that image taken with the proper lighting. And if you're still not convinced, what do you think of this? If you look at the image and if you look at the checker pattern, at the top part of the image, all the checkers are square, but at the bottom area, they kind of get distorted. So why is that? Well, usually when things are distorted like this, it's representing a curved surface. So imagine if you had a cloth, a checkered cloth and a tablecloth, and you laid it on a flat surface, all the checkers would look square. But if you laid it over a curved surface, the boxes would no longer be square. They would be distorted. If you look at the image, on the left and on the right of the statue, you have trees. There's another third little tree here that may have been new growth since the last 40 years. I'm not sure. But if we look at the lower portion of the photograph, you know, with the pedestal down here, well, that looks very similar to the pedestal on the clock. And if you look down here, we have two trees that are rounded surfaces. So what I believe the artist was trying to depict here was the two trees on either side of this pedestal. And if you look on the tree on the right here, of course it's 40 years later, it has kind of a swirly pattern to it. Well, to me, that kind of matches what is going on here in the image to the right of the clock. It looks to me that it's almost an exact match for this swirly pattern on the tree. So I do indeed believe that this is the key viewpoint and that this is the image that the mask and hand were created from. I'll just throw this out there because I did spend a little bit of time on it, but again, it's another thing that I don't give too much merit because it was very hard to accurately map things using Google Maps, especially you can see with the tree coverage. But if you look at the quadrant where the spring statue stands, it's on the right side of the image there of Jackson Square. And you look at the clock, if you noticed on the clock, on the perimeter of the clock, there's these little tick marks. Three of them look the same and are represented with the circles. This one is different, so I put a square around it. This little second hand is an odd feature, and of course the center of the clock I just put a star. So if you're in this quadrant and you're standing approximately where the star is, this little circle, the second hand represents, there's a little circular planter there. The spring statue is located about here, and then to the left and right and behind you, directly behind you, are three street lamps. So it kind of matches the pattern that was shown here in the clock image, but again, it's really hard to determine this from Google Maps. Here is a ground level view of that same area, and the only reason I'm showing that is that if you were standing at the star, which represents the center of the clock, you know, here's one of the lamps to the left, here's another street lamp to the right, here's the street lamp behind, here's the little circular planter feature. This arrow represents the spring statue. The blue arrow is the lamp behind the spring statue. But I think this might be representative of where you stand to take the photo of the key viewpoint. Not sure, like I said, I'm just throwing this out there. I would like it to be true. One thing I'd like to mention is the key viewpoint may have been created using this lamp in the foreground and standing even further away from the spring statue. It might, or it would definitely cause a different look to the composite drawing. It may look something like what is shown on the left here. It's really hard without being at the site to come up with these images, to imagine these images. But something shown here on the left is a little more to scale as what is shown in the drawing. So I think what it comes down to is which lamp or lines up better with the statue, and this could be very important as you will see later in the solution. I hope you're still with me and believe we are going down the right path. Now on to the good stuff, the cask location. So now that we've determined the direction of the key viewpoint, the cask must be located somewhere along that same sight line. The sight line is shown in the left image with the point of the arrow being the location of the spring statue. If we look to the right, there are 5 possible burial locations. The first is this large grass area between the first sidewalk and the statue of Andrew Jackson. The second is a little planter here next to some benches. The third is another grass area, smaller grass area. The fourth is a little circular planter. And the fifth area being that between the spring statue and the corner of the park. All these locations line up with the sight line and the viewpoint. So let's take a closer look at each one of those areas. The first area is a wide open grass lawn between the main inner sidewalk and the outer sidewalk. There's really no features here, and it's a pretty wide open area, so it seems to me that this is not an area where the cask might be. The second possible location is this area behind these benches. Looks like a planter area and is filled with pretty mature hedges. The third area is another lawn area. I'm showing it from both directions. This is an interesting area because the key viewpoint might have been taken standing on this lawn, maybe approximately here. You can see the spring statue there. If that's the case, I was thinking, well, maybe if you took 21 steps with your feet end to end, it would be the same width as this lawn area. So in the middle of that would put you right about here or here, which could possibly be the spot where the key viewpoint or the key photograph was taken. For my previous analysis, it would have been more up here on the sidewalk, but keep that in mind. I think there are better areas coming up anyway. This is the fourth possible location, this little circular planter in front of the spring statue. It seems like this would be a difficult place to hide a cask. It would do a lot of damage. Although the only possibility I could think is that if you were standing here and that image of the lamp and the spring statue line up perfectly, that's what leads you to the spot. But I think I have a better solution. This is the fifth and final possible location for the burial of the cask. It is the area behind the spring statue and the corner of Jackson Square. It's a very busy area, just catty corner to this corner of Jackson Square is Cafe du Monde, very popular tourist spot. Also, the ground is covered with low growth shrubbery. You can see here the lamppost in the back, and because the key viewpoint was set up with the lamppost behind the spring statue and the lamppost directly behind it, I felt that that was a clue that this is the burial site for the cask. Until I came to this. So if we go back to the verse, the very last lines of the verse are in the middle of 21 from end to end. That has to be a clue to the exact location of the cask. Of the 5 areas we looked at, the only area that has any kind of physical objects that may be able to be counted is this bench structure by this hedge area near the middle of the quadrant. I counted the benches from end to end, and unfortunately, the number came out to 20. But remember, if there's 20 benches, then there has to be 21 legs. So this little white patch here, whether it's paint or bird poop, was the key to counting these legs. So let's start from the right side. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is at the paint feature. So the paint feature is number 8. Continuing down the other side, this leg here with the paint fissure was number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. If this is leg number 8, this is leg number 9, this is leg number 10, this is leg number 11, which is the middle leg of 21. That leads me to believe that, boom, this is where the cask is buried. From an overhead view, the cask is buried approximately at this point. This is the middle of that bench of 21 legs. This is the hedge or shrubbery area. I would think that it would probably be buried closer to the leg, maybe right behind the bench, but it could be somewhere in this whole section. And it's definitely along that same sight line to the spring statue. So I've never been to Jackson Square. This is something that I would encourage people to look at and validate my solution. Here's a closer view of the burial site. Note the spring statue in the background, the other lamp in the foreground. And I would think that even back 40 years ago that there must have been something planted here, and that usually it would be planted in the center of this feature. So I tend to believe that the cask is buried closer to the bench than closer to the other side of the feature. So here's a look from the other side. And what I was talking about earlier about the key viewpoint, if that image was taken from the location of the cask, then it's this lamp in the foreground that was used to line up with the spring statue and to form that composite drawing. And that's what I was saying, why the aspect ratio in the composite might be a little different, or might, so I'll leave that up to the community to take those photographs and figure out exactly whether it was the lamp in front or the lamp in back that was used to create the image. Wait, I got more. So if you look at the image of the clock and you look specifically at the second hand, when I first started looking at these puzzles, a lot of people were focusing in on the second hand and saying that, well, that must represent the location of the cask. If you look at the clock, it has 3 concentric circles. If you look at an image of Jackson Square, and Byron Preiss would not have a satellite image of Jackson Square, but he probably would have an image on a map, paper map, which is just as good for what I want to show you. If you look at the Jackson Square, and then the 3 rings, that kind of matches up with the square and the 3 rings on the clock. Well, this little second hand is pointing in between the first and second ring, which is exactly where I'm placing the location of the cask. And as you can see from the images, they're almost to scale. It almost lines up. The only thing that else I would say is that if that is true, the second hand looks like it's in the middle of this feature. So maybe the cask is buried more towards the middle of that hedge. Hard to say without inspecting it, you know. I'll leave that up to the community to determine. And for the remaining few of you that are still not convinced, I submit my piece de resistance. Dig Jacks. When I began my solution, I was reviewing a lot of the material that was online. I remember coming across a theory that the word dig was hidden in the boy's leggings, was written in the boy's leggings, and then later the words dig jacks. And then it got to the point where people believed that it not only said dig jacks, but its foot here, the toes here, pointed to the exact location of the cask. Well, Jack's is short for Jackson, and Jack's is also the name of the brewery that is nearby. So it kind of makes sense that it kind of looks, the dig is very clear. The Jack's I wasn't so sure about, but you know, deep, deep, deep down inside, I was hoping it was true. It seems it would make the solution to this puzzle very simple, but it would be great if it was true. On the right, you have the satellite image showing the location of the cask. Satellite images, like maps, are always drawn or shown with north pointing towards the top of the page or up. If you take the image of the clock and you scale it so that the kind of squarish rectangular area around the clock, face of the clock, is the same size as the satellite image, and you rotate it so that the hands of the clock are no longer pointing north, but are now pointing towards the clock on the St. Louis Cathedral, you get this. And when you overlay the two images, the boy's toe does exactly line up with the cask location. Mind officially blown. I'll let everyone to make, come to their own conclusions about this. First thing I think about, is there a back door to simply solving these puzzles without having to decipher all the clues in the verse and the image? Who knows? But I hope this gets people excited, unites the secret community, and brings us together to finally dig jacks. I hope you agree that this is the solution to the New Orleans puzzle, and all comments and critiques are welcomed. Please, no disturbing of the Jackson Square parkland, no probing, no digging without a permit. As a start point, I've created a GoFundMe page to raise the funds, to maybe gather the leverage to obtain that permit, and finally dig up this cask. This has been the Jack Stickin' Dude, signing out.